So, are you ready to finally put the rumors to rest?
Oh, about being the same person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, are people gonna buy it though? Because they don't have visual evidence.
Ah, that's true.
There's a lot that can be done with technology these days.
Clearly, we are the same person. We're just manipulating the masses. This is touted as being the greatest WCW Nitro of all time.
It's funny to me that that is the reputation that it carries because it has the massive moment with Goldberg beating Hogan. But I mean, I don't know if we're going spoilers right in the beginning, but god damn, was this a slog to get through. I was a huge WCW fan growing up, and I still look back on it fondly, but sitting down to watch a 3-hour Nitro, I think they played 11 packages for DDP and Karl Malone. The bell rings for the first match at 17 minutes and 11 seconds. We had to sit through 5 minutes of the commentators just talking about nothing. Larry Zbyszko was out of his mind. We get 5 minutes of the commentators just like talking about WCW and like kind of random happenings that were going on, which feels very sports oriented. Like if you turn on a baseball game, you're going to see the commentators talking about how the team is doing, you know, who's hot right now and like that. So I see what they were going for there. But I have a direct quote from Larry Zbyszko, which was, "This is the dawn of time. Carbon-based life forms have pulled themselves out of the primitive pile of slime."
I just love the phrasing. It's like all these years that the human species has been around, has been coming to this. This is the conclusion. This is the pinnacle of humanity. Bill Goldberg. He starts talking about Goldberg as if he is the most evolved form of man.
Yeah, that had to be what it was, because we're going from carbon-based life forms to now this creature, I guess, that is Goldberg. Hogan comes out and cuts this strained voice promo, which included the line at one point that I loved, which was, "It would be a pleasure to get this jabroni Goldberg out of the way." He totally flubbed Goldberg's name, and I think that was the best part of the show.
I actually really enjoyed this episode.
Oh my god! What a masterpiece!
Good. Okay, we'll have two completely different takes on it then.
With that being said, I agree with you that it was not the easiest to get through because I had to try to watch this about 6 or 7 times.
Oh man.
But I did enjoy it when I finally sat down and watched all of it.
That's a funny part of this is you and I had talked about doing this probably a month ago.
Yeah.
So I watched this a month ago and took all of my notes. And then maybe an hour ago, I put it on again to like get back in the headspace, and I went through my notes to remind myself.
Mm-hmm.
And even on that second watch, it was like, dude, every match is like a minute long with a finish.
Okay, so I was gonna mention that. This show takes place at a point in time where wrestling was just a very small portion of what actually happened on a wrestling show.
Yeah, there's no wrestling at all. The Canyon and Raven go 3 minutes. Booker T and Jericho go 3:40. Putski and Riggs go like a minute and a half. And we're just getting started. They're all like that.
The longest match on the card isn't even 10 minutes long.
No.
One isn't even a minute long. It's so ridiculous. But nevertheless, it's a star-studded show filled with stars, should have been stars, and also Johnny Swinger.
That is very true. 40,000 in the arena for an episode of Nitro. This isn't Starrcade. This isn't Halloween Havoc. And with 1 week's notice, they're like, "Hey, Goldberg Hogan," and 40,000 in Atlanta, Georgia were like, "I'm gonna be there."
So that's what was really strange to me about this show. The whole build of it is toward the main event, which is Hogan and Goldberg. You could say that that's a great main event for a Nitro, but that really should have been a main event for a pay-per-view.
And I think Eric Bischoff has addressed this a bunch of times where they got a lot of criticism at the time and in the years since where it's like, well, WCW business, they had bad business because they gave away big money shit. And Bischoff was like, we were owned by a television company who wanted television ratings. That was our goal from up top, so that's what we did. So like from that perspective, it's like, okay, that makes sense. But from the other perspective, it's like, okay, well, you at least could have built it for more than a week.
Yeah, that was very strange. Like, I think this episode does a really good job of giving this a big fight feel. Like, you definitely feel like this is an experience. This is an event. Everybody's talking about it, including during other people's matches. All we can talk about is Goldberg versus Hogan. But outside of that, like, there was no build before tonight.
And they reminded you about that by showing, like, oh, flashback throughout Goldberg's winning streak. And it's like, here he is beating random 11. Here's random 19.
What are you talking about? They showed Goldberg versus Glacier.
Has he had any actual competition up to this point? Or did he face 106 tomato cans and now he gets the world champion? I know he beat Raven for the US title, which like they don't even give a shit about at all. Like what the
Let's just get into the segment by segment. The show starts off the way every WCW Nitro show started off during this time period, and that's with the Hollywood Hogan promo, with a bunch of people behind him who are doing absolutely nothing.
I forgot that Bischoff literally was just a human microphone stand. And in retrospect, it's very funny. Seeing it again, it was like, oh, he really did just stand there and hold it, didn't he? Wow. I do have to say, though, for not being like a wrestler, just being like a guy who did some TV stuff and like a sales guy, to be thrust into this sort of thing, Bischoff was great. Like, he was one of the best.
Oh, absolutely. Well, because you know what? Like, and I mean this as a compliment. It's not going to sound like one, but I do mean it as a compliment. He has the most punchable face I've ever seen a human man have.
And that's a good line, and it's hard to argue with. But I will also say that I once used in a text conversation with my girlfriend. She said something funny, and then I responded with a GIF of 1998 Eric Bischoff when he had like the black hair and the 5 o'clock shadow, and he's got a big smile on his face. And she responded, she's like, that's one of the most handsome men I've ever seen in my life. Bischoff, a hit with the ladies, it seems.
He was really good at intentionally being hated. His facial expressions were always on point. He added to a lot of what Hogan did, and I think that gets understated. But I would put him up there as being a better manager for Hulk Hogan than Jimmy Hart was.
If somebody says that that's controversial, I would like to ask them why. Because what the f*** did Jimmy Hart ever do? Other than, yeah, maybe we gotta go out there, maybe. Like, he never did anything substantial. He's just there. He was also there with, like, 48 other people throughout his WCW tenure. Half the time, he'd be involved in half the matches. It's like, oh, here's Juventud with Jimmy Hart. Why? Oh, I don't know. Jimmy's bored.
Hogan tells the 1 or 2 Goldberg fans out there that they're out of luck because he's not going to face Bill Goldberg unless he can get through one of his NWO brothers first.
Hogan had a habit in this era of saying something and then taking a big lap around to say it again the exact same way. He wouldn't even change the wording. He'd be like, I'm going to bring in an NWO black and white brother that you haven't seen in a while. 38 seconds of filler. So when that NWO black and white brother that you haven't seen in a while, it's like, gee, dude, I know. You just said this. I know.
Despite repeating himself, he very rarely, gets to the point.
No, never.
That's why Eric Bischoff, I felt like a lot of the time had to reiterate, okay, so this is what he just said. Because you want to talk about, Ultimate Warrior having promos that went nowhere and made no sense. I understood the Ultimate Warrior a lot better than I understood Hollywood Hogan.
Warrior was so insane that you would try your hardest to pay attention because you knew he was going to say something that would make you go, what the f*** does that mean? With Hogan, it's just him droning on with this strained throat. It's like, just come on, wrap it up. Let's move on to the next deal here. Jesus Christ.
I feel like history has remembered Triple H as being the droning 20-minute promo guy. But let me tell you, at least he had a point when he spoke, you know?
He did. Hogan just had no safety net, and it seemed like whenever he felt like he was done, that's when it would wrap.
Also, obviously, a huge thing to note is throughout the promo, the Goldberg chants in the arena
Yeah.
are almost deafening. Like, it is so ridiculous. There have been so few people in the history of wrestling that have been as over as this man is at this current point in time.
If this wasn't the peak came within the next like 2 months.
Yeah.
And it was crazy because I was watching back then. I'm going to be 34 in December. So I don't know how many people listening were around for this and watching at the time, but it was crazy then, and I actually think it's more impressive coming back to it.
Wait a second, you're a December baby too?
Yes, sir.
That's strange.
We just are the same person. We're finding out about it.
We're not beating the allegations here. Is it worth noting that this is the first conversation that you and I have actually ever had?
I love that right after this promo, we cut to a fan outside who tells Hulk Hogan it's not 1985 anymore, it's 1998. And the only thing I have written on my notes is, it sure is, buddy. It sure is.
They're just letting fans cut promos against Hogan because Goldberg can't speak, which is fantastic. So this fan opens his promo with, "History began in 1985. That's an Ultimate Warrior line if I've ever heard one.
Then Hogan shills a shirt that I had as a child.
Yeah, so it worked.
Mean Gene interviews last year's winner of Mark Martin's Winston Cup race car. I don't know what any of those words mean, but those are the words that are spoken. This is the most uncomfortable man on television that I've ever seen in my life. He asks him, he goes, "What's happening out there where you live?" And this man responds, "Everyone's turning into WCW."
It's like, how do you know? Here's the thing I like. You said this is the most uncomfortable man on television. And I agree with you. And this is on the same episode where a half-paralyzed, wheelchair-bound Buff Bagwell arrives with his mom. But this guy is more uncomfortable, and it's a fact. There was a thing that Mean Gene said there, which made me kind of question, again, what was happening. Where they're talking about giving away this car through Valvoline or whatever the fuck it is they're doing. And Mean Gene says, like, "Can you believe we're giving this car away again?" And it's like, oh, what do you mean you gave it away before? Did they give it back?
The first match of the night, I think you said, what is this, like 17, 18 minutes in? Dean Malenko versus Booker T for the World Television Championship. Can I tell you that I don't remember any other television champion other than Booker T?
You can tell me that, but that means you missed the fantastic reign of Chris Jericho. Don't ask me what he did with it, because I don't remember. I just know I remember he had the belt. Jim Duggan fished it out of the trash when Scott Hall threw it in there. That was years later.
That just makes me think he threw it out at a different arena, and somehow it traveled. So, like, are they just taking their garbage with them from show to show? Because that explains a lot of the roster.
Well, Buff Bagwell signed an exclusive deal.
I was a huge Dean Malenko mark as a kid. This dude was as cool as he was cold to me, and I do not know why. He's always looked like your substitute science teacher, but he could go in the ring. I would compare him to Bryan Danielson. On the subject of Booker T, this was a really weird time to be a Booker T fan because he's got a singles run now, but he's still presented like he's the other half of Harlem Heat. He's still dressed up like Stevie Ray. He still has the same music as Stevie Ray, but we're supposed to buy him as a singles superstar when there's somebody else on the roster who dresses like him, enters to the same... So, you know, it was weird.
I liked Booker T. I liked his drop kick. I liked all his crazy kicks. So as a kid, it was working for me. I wasn't questioning, like, well, where's Stevie Ray? I was just like, hey, Booker T.
In the history of history, no one has ever asked, where is Stevie Ray? That has not been a question anybody was looking for the answer for.
You might be right about that.
Probably one of the worst parts of the NWO team, and that's really saying something.
Hey man, Horace Hogan is in there. Let me derail real quick and ask, how old were you when you found out that the Disciple and Brutus Beefcake are the same guy?
Oh man, I made a video on this. I was not a child. I was in my 20s.
I think I found out like 5 years ago.
It was only mentioned once, to my knowledge, by Roddy Piper in a promo.
And he probably wasn't supposed to.
Yeah, the crowd popped for it, so it definitely wasn't common knowledge. They're like, oh, that's who that guy is.
I knew he sucked.
So Dean and Booker T have a pretty good back and forth, but not enough that you can judge this as a match, because midway through, Chris Jericho comes down the ramp. And he starts trying to get Dean Malenko's attention, because around this time, the two of them were in this massive feud for the Cruiserweight division. That is probably a stroke of genius, putting these two polar opposites together, because you only get gold from it. Jericho is so animated and over the top and super talkative, and Dean Malenko, true story, Dean Malenko is involved in multiple segments, including a promo during the show, and he does not speak once.
Just to jump ahead, there's a part where J.J. Dillon is basically in between Jericho and Malenko, and it's like, you can't touch each other, the match will be thrown out, you'll be suspended, whatever. And it's so long. And like 6 minutes into this, I'm like, can Dean not speak? I realize he's not as quick as Jericho, he's not as witty, but this feels like J.J. Dillon is his dad. And he's like, well, my son will beat your butt.
Well, J.J. Dillon couldn't be his dad, because as Jericho reminded us, Dean's dad is dead. He's pulling a page of Christian's book, and it hasn't even been written yet.
I never wanted to be your father figure. You have a father, but your father's dead. Brian Pillman, your father was average at best. Wardlow also had a father, and your father is dead.
But back to this match, it was 3 minutes and 40 seconds, so a real barn burner.
In WCW time, 3 minutes and 4 cruiserweights is like an Iron Man match. Jericho distracts Dean, and Booker T ends up hitting him for the win, but the timing is really, really off on this.
Jericho causes this distraction, which gives Booker the opportunity to get the win. Booker T's a good guy. And at no point does Booker T even like make a face that's like, well, I didn't want to win like that. You know, he just accepts it. Like, oh, fuck it, I'm done. I'm going in the shower.
See, here's the problem with this episode, is it's going to become very repetitive on my end, because I don't know how many times I can say, man, I love both these guys so much. Like, I was such a fan of the product at the time that, like, I'm realizing their roster, like, just the roster in general was over with me.
Yeah, no doubt. Even when I said, like, oh, this is a slog to get through and all that, and, like, there's not much wrestling, the roster is what made me a WCW kid. So most of the time, I'm also going to be like, yeah, dude, both of these guys, like, this is good shit. But it's just the episode itself was the slog. Like, the next match coming up, love both of those guys.
I was the biggest Ravens flock fan you could find at this age. I blame Raven personally for the reason I dress homeless in my 30s. So we go to Goldberg working out backstage, and once again, I bring this up because the mere sight of this man on the Turnertron is enough for the crowd to go wild. Has there ever been anybody who's gotten more over by simply just existing? Guy is such a beast. Like, he is a machine. Literally, if the WCW Mayhem intro is to be believed.
Dude, I used to, every time I would turn that game on, I would let that whole intro cinematic play because it was so sick.
It was awesome. And I was like, is that ever going to be brought up on TV, that this is not a man?
He's more machine now than man.
We go to a Karl Malone taped promo, who promotes the main event of Bash at the Beach, which is going to see 2 basketball players team up with 2 wrestlers in a tag team match, which I can only imagine is going to be an instant classic. He's not a very good talker, but like, I get the feeling that he's trying really hard to be.
Not a great talker, but he does, in real life, refer to himself in the third person. He serves on the board of the NRA, and he... So... shout out to Karl Malone, I guess.
The babyface in all of this.
Yeah, how about it? Also, I think was not present in the lives of several of his kids, and was interviewed about it later and was like, well, it's too late now.
Okay, so fun fact. I didn't know any of this before this recording. I did 0 research on the life and times of Karl Malone.
That's the mailman, baby.
Oh, He calls himself the mailman. He made all those deliveries.
Yeah, that's what that was.
Oh my god, I never realized that. I never realized that. That's terrible. Dennis Rodman all the way. All he does is play basketball with a nice whimsical dictator.
And marries himself. Drives a motorcycle in a wedding dress and looks pretty damn good doing it.
And he also did that one movie with Dane Cook.
All true stories.
Sometimes fact is really stranger than fiction. The next match is Kanyon versus Raven with Lodi. Once again, I love all these guys. I don't know why, but I thought these guys were the coolest, even though most of them were just interchangeable dudes who raided Raven's wardrobe.
I'm with you. I love the flock. Like, in retrospect, we can make fun of not that you can hear it on the WWE Network anymore, or whatever they call it now, the knockoff Nirvana Come As You Are theme song that Raven had. At the time, that was cool.
Loved it.
Their grunge outfits were cool as.
Loved it.
The fact that Raven would oftentimes slip like copyrighted comic book imagery on his t-shirts on television, because back then nerd culture was not mainstream and nobody knew what it was except the real who were watching. It was good.
Dude, to that effect, I had 2 Raven action figures, and both of them had Marvel properties on his t-shirts.
You probably had the same one I did. It was a Titantron Live, and the shirt is just straight up the Punisher.
Yes!
That figure is so sick.
and I had a WCW figure where he was very obviously wearing a Daredevil shirt.
This match, Kanyon and Raven, I loved. Dude, the Kanyon theme song, which it's just like generic guitar, like bam, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, bam. But when it's going and he's talking shit to the camera as he's coming down that awesome Nitro stage, God, Kanyon was awesome.
One of the most underrated workers of this time period. Not only was he great in the ring, but I think it gets overlooked that he had a very big personality too. Like, he was good at that.
Big time.
Who better than Kanyon? Nobody!
I remember I would play as Kanyon a lot in the awful game, WCW NWO Thunder. And it was because every character in that game had like a couple special moves that were outside of their finisher. And all of Kanyon's special moves were cool as so I would play as him to be able to do those moves. And then coming back and watching Kanyon matches when you're older, you're like, oh, he had those moves in the game because he would just bust out the coolest every week. Like, that's what made him so innovative at the time, and like why so many guys of today talk about Kanyon being the man. It's because they're doing his
I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock you. I loved that game as a kid.
I think we all did as kids.
Unplayable as an adult. So the story of this match leading into it is that Kanyon, the
Gorborg.
The former Mortal Kombat ripoff Mortis, wants to join the flock, but Ravens turned him down. Which must suck to get rejected by rejects.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And in a team that includes the likes of Van Hammer and the Super Giant Ninja, I'm sorry, I think that there's some room for Chris Kanyon.
I don't remember like where this went. I think Kanyon did wind up with them eventually, but why in the moment would Raven have said no? It's like, won't you just take anybody? Don't you just want an army of fighters to kind of run distractions for you?
Well, I guess that depends if you mean in shoot or kayfabe.
I didn't want Ron Reese. I didn't want Hammer. I didn't want Riggs. I didn't want Kidman. I didn't want anybody else except Saturn.
One thing I want to point out before we talk about the match itself, or lack thereof, is that Lodi is so annoying and yet so important for Raven's character.
I was just going to say, Lodi was a guy that I never connected with. And I guess I'm not supposed to. He did annoy me, which is his job, and I get that now. But I would be excited to see everybody else. But I think even then, with Lodi, I was like, yeah, just get this guy out of here.
I don't remember this guy ever hitting a move. I don't remember this guy ever taking a move. I just remember the signs.
I remember he took a move. Fall Brawl 98, Saturn hits him with a Death Valley driver off a ring apron through a table. And I used to rewind that spot over and over to the point that I almost wore the tape out just because I thought that was so cool.
If it sounds like we're not talking a lot about the wrestling, there isn't a lot of wrestling to talk about in this episode.
Yeah, almost none. This match goes, I think, 3 minutes flat. I was doing my best to keep the stats because I'm a weird stats guy.
The match is surprisingly one-sided, and it's surprisingly not the side that you think it would be for. Because Raven is just getting his ass kicked the whole time.
Yeah.
Canyon drops a chair on Raven's head at one point, and he just does it so carelessly. Zero regard for him whatsoever. But it does sell the fact that this is legitimate, because that probably was.
He drops that chair on his head. I think at one point he might give him a flapjack, which is half of a 3D for everybody who doesn't know the wrestling move names. Raven hits a superplex through the chair, and then this match ends in a disqualification. What the f*** are you talking about?
The hardcore match ends in a disqualification.
Wanted Raven's rules, and he got it. So did Raven tell the referee earlier, hey, we're going to use weapons? That's cool. We're going to rake each other's eyes? That's cool. But if that Saturn comes down here, I want you to ring the goddamn bell.
Another reoccurring theme on this show, and it's going to play all throughout, but basically every time a match starts to pick up momentum, it starts to get real good, or, it's on the precipice of being watchable, it comes to a premature conclusion time and time again. Every single match. As soon as you're in, they're out.
Oh man, this isn't that bad. Oh, ding, 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 ding. And it's almost, I would say 70% of the time, it's a disqualification from interference or a weapon. It's never it's almost never one guy just gets the other.
Yeah. Well, that was the style of this specific generation. I know that WCW gets a lot of hate thrown its way for this, but people forget the Attitude Era in WWE was the same exact thing. False finish after false finish. Somebody's got to interfere. So a match turns into a segment. That was the booking of this decade.
It was, and I think that's one of the reasons that I've always been one of the people who much prefers the Ruthless Aggression era to the Attitude Era.
I think that there's something to take from both. I was a fan of the segments, not all of them, obviously, but I was a fan of the segments from the Attitude Era. But watching those back, sometimes you're just okay, can we have a match at some point?
Yeah.
Can we put wrestling on this wrestling show? So Saturn comes out, Saturn who is teaming with Canyon at this point in time. He attacks the Flock, and Future Flock accidentally attacking his partner with the segment ending, with Canyon then also allegedly accidentally attacking Saturn back.
The announcers don't seem to know what's going on, and you're watching it and you kind of don't either, because they're that's going to be his partner next week. I don't know if he knows that. And it's what the is happening? It's just a bunch of guys hitting moves. I love that Saturn goes under the ring and he gets a table, which is clearly a very real table. This is not a folding table that you always see on wrestling shows. This thing, it just looks like a hunk of wood with also wooden legs and a steel frame. And as soon as he grabbed it, I was that is not going to break. I don't care what they do. That thing's not going to break. Puts Raven on it, splash off the top to the outside. The table barely bends. And Raven did not stick around and say, do it again. He rolled off that was let's get out of here.
And Saturn looked like he took the brunt end of it, because it looked like he went chest first into the table.
And how did he sell it? He walks away I got him.
Did the same thing to a bullet, so it's not surprising for me.
I would like to note Saturn, I don't think there's any debate about this, has the best Death Valley driver of all time.
Oh, without question.
It's so brutal looking.
Nobody comes close either.
I think that's exactly what I have. My notes say Saturn has the best DVD of all time, not close. So we agree on that.
So we are the same person. Cool.
How did you feel about the execution of Judy and Buff Bagwell arriving? in what is like a 4-minute segment of them getting out of a limo.
I have a couple of notes on this.
Okay, go ahead.
I wrote, Buff Bagwell arrives to the arena in a neck brace, being wheeled in by his mother Judy, and then I wrote in parentheses, they were Sheldon and his mama before Sheldon and his mama.
Jesus Christ.
Future WCW Tag Team Champion Judy Bagwell arrives.
You know what? I think I scrubbed that from my memory, too. I forgot she had a belt at some point.
I will say, in spite of him being a heel, the crowd is very happy to see him. And I don't know if that's just because he was injured or because Buff was legitimately over with this crowd.
I think they were just happy that he was okay. I never enjoyed Buff Bagwell on my TV.
Buff wasn't the stuff for you.
No, he was not the stuff, no.
You had enough of Buff.
I had enough of Buff.
There was a Nitro Girls dance after this. I didn't mention the one in the beginning.
That was the stuff for me.
It's a good segue. I don't remember the Nitro Girls appearing on Nitro quite as much as I saw them on this show. I thought that they only appeared during, like, the end of each hour.
Who was your favorite Nitro Girl?
I think I remember liking Shawn Michaels' wife before I knew she became Shawn Michaels' wife.
Back then, I want to say my favorite was, I don't know her name. Why am I talking about this like I was going to know what her name was?
Another thing I don't remember, but I will complain a little bit about, are Nitro parties. Do you remember these segments? Because I had no recollection of it.
I do remember these. What I did not remember was the sponsor spot from Mug Root Beer, whose slogan at the time was, "The foam goes straight to your brain." And I was like, that sounds painful. I don't think anybody wants that. And don't you hate the foam anyway, whether it's beer or root beer? Don't people complain? They're like, oh, you didn't pour it right. So your selling point is how much foam there is?
See, you're giving me, like, Nom flashbacks right now, because I'm coming out of watching Brooke Knows Best.
What are you watching that for?
For my channel.
You up in that regard. You put out videos that do so well about the worst, and that's the cross you have to bear.
That's so accurate. So on an episode of Brooke Knows Best, they go to this foam party. Apparently what it is you go to a rave, and then they fill up the room with foam like you're inside a washing machine, and then they spray you down with chocolate syrup.
That just sounds sticky.
Yeah, the Nitro parties sound amazing comparatively now.
The Nitro parties for you were undiscovered.
Oh, deep cuts.
How many people are going to get that bit?
DDP and Karl Malone promo is what I have next.
Again, this is number 2. Keep a tally.
Maybe a little bit more justified given the time and the fact that they're building toward a main event. What is less justified is how much airtime the Flock gets in this episode. It is crazy. Like, especially when you compare it to, and I'm not going to spoil it just yet, especially when you compare it to another big-time stable that was literally on the show for only seconds. It's kind of insane.
Yeah.
DDP cuts a promo saying that Hulk Hogan has no chance at the pay-per-view and he has no chance in the ring against Goldberg tonight.
Is this also when they're showing like the 18-wheelers going across the country?
Yes it is.
Yeah, so they're showing that, and at one point they show the NWO, which includes Bret Hart at this point. I forgot how quickly that happened. It's Bret Hart, Scott Steiner, Hogan, all the from the NWO are just standing around a table, and they all have crowbars. And they're like, I'm going to hit him with this. Oh, I'm going to beat his brains in. I'm going to smack him with that. This group of grown men are just standing around a table, all with crowbars, saying like what they're going to do with them.
It's the 80s style of camp wrestling, but like masquerading as the 90s edgy wrestling.
That's a great way to put it.
You feel that anyway anytime you hear Hogan talk right next to Hall and Nash. Completely different promo styles. And I think a lot of those early NWO years, a lot of those promos were probably carried by Hall and Nash.
No doubt, as was the cool factor.
Yes, very much so. Because I remember thinking Hollywood Hogan was awesome when I was a kid. And I watch him back now and I'm like, he is so out of his element.
Yeah, he almost comes off like an old man, like with these cool guys. It's like, dude, why did they invite their uncle?
One thing I want to point out about DDP and Karl Malone is when you see people surrounding Hollywood Hogan and they're wearing the same gear as him, that's because they're part of the same brand. They're all NWO guys. But even Rodman shows up and has his own custom NWO shirts for the most part. Karl Malone is just straight up wearing DDP's clothes. You're like, were they supposed to go for the tag titles at some point?
I've always found that weird too, because DDP, he wore those like really high-waisted pants. And then when Karl Malone wrestles with him, he wears the same ones. And as a kid, I didn't put together that's like, oh, maybe he just let him borrow tights, because like Karl Malone's not a wrestler. He doesn't have his own tights.
DDP threatens Hogan and threatens to make him one banged up boy.
That's like a Tim and Eric line.
Karl Malone calls himself the Rodzilla Killer and says that he'll knock the paint out of Rodman's hair and whip him like Madonna should have whipped him. So we leave one promo from a sports star turned wrestler to go to another promo from a sports star turned wrestler.
Never mind that shit. Here comes Mongo.
Steve Mongo McMichael, which in my notes I have Mongo promo. Where the is the wrestling?
He is talking to nobody in particular about where he's been and where he wants to go. He spends the promo asking Arn Anderson and Ric Flair, I think he's asking them to reform the Horsemen. If I remember correctly, I think that the gimmick at the time was Malenko, Benoit, and Mongo were begging the Horsemen to come back. And then when they did come back, they all got turned into Horsemen. Not actual. They didn't get turned into centaurs, but you understand what I mean. They were horsemen.
That would have been awesome, though.
Next up, Riggs versus Scott Putski.
Yeah, this sure happened. These two guys, Putski and Riggs, go a little less than 4 minutes. Nobody cares. This doesn't matter. There's no ramifications. There's no point to this even being on the show. I would just like to note that current day Eric Bischoff likes to slam AEW for what he calls random matches. Look at what the WCW was doing in their prime.
Would you believe that I have the most notes on this match?
What?
God damn it. I don't know what the fuck. I don't know how you got notes. The only thing I have about the match is Putski wins with the Putski bomb, sky high, in about 4 minutes. That's all I got.
Putski walks to the ring looking like he just came off the set of Interview with the Vampire.
I was shocked when I discovered that my most hated enemy had a twin.
It's weird to me because I remember the name Putski a lot as a kid. So I looked him up. I was like, where have I heard this name before? Like what did he do in WCW? Would you believe me if I told you that according to his Wikipedia, he had 3 matches of note in WCW, and this was one of them.
We now know that Scott Putski wrote his own Wikipedia page.
I wanted to commend Riggs. He did a complete transformation when going into the flock. However, Buff Bagwell won the breakup.
From the American males? I think the eye patch is an underutilized look today. I think eye patches are just inherently sick.
Raven legitimately injured him in a match. In storyline, Riggs then became ostracized by society. This is what they say on commentary. Because of his deformity.
Jesus Christ.
It should also be known, the commentators, the whole match, don't put over either man. They just kind of talk about Putski's father, who was a famous wrestler that Larry Zbyszko once faced.
Yeah. Well, if there's one thing that Larry Zbyszko wants to talk about, it's what Larry Zbyszko did and will do later.
Yes.
The first or the second note that I have of Larry Zbyszko just saying weird, where it's during the replay after the match is over, Larry Zbyszko goes, Riggs couldn't make it to the window. Let's give some of that money to the Polish boys. What the f*** does that mean?
Low kisses to the crowd in his spare. Goldberg's backstage, and he hits his head on a locker to hype himself up. This is something he'd do in real life multiple times. and it's something that would lead to a concussion and one of the worst matches of The Undertaker's career.
Where both guys nearly killed each other by dropping each other on their heads. Goldberg, yeah, he headbutts the locker hard as and the thing is, it's not time for either one of his matches. So it's like he's back there hyping himself up. So are we to believe that Goldberg is back there just headbutting constantly, waiting for someone to say like, hey, it's time to go? So how many times is he hitting his head on the wall?
Goldberg has accumulated 3 concussions throughout tonight's show, has not entered the ring once.
This is what we worked so hard to achieve.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.